Welcome to part 7 of this series where I'm designing and building a cruising dinghy for 2 people. I'm calling it the Bed Bug. In this video, number 7 of the build series, I'm going to finish this seat that goes on the main thwart. I'm going to do a little bit of like trim work at the stern, and I'm going to fit this Foredeck up front that's going to secure the tabernacle in, really add a lot of strength to that area of the boat. I'm going to work on these Spacered Inwales, and that's going to involve making a little breast hook and fitting those pieces in at the bow. Some of this work as I'm doing trim on the boat is prep for finish work too, prep for glue, and so I need to cut the opening for the dagger board, cut that dagger board trunk open at the top and the bottom. Then I'm going to come back in with a little bit of glass, make something of a glass and thickened epoxy stem, and a little bit more glass and kind of some finish work as I get this ready for paint. So let's get into it. First thing I'm working on in this video is this seat that I'm sitting on from my main thwart. Last video I got kind of creative the way that I put these cleats on here. I thought I was clever and how I attached them to the actual framing of the boat, and then just with that hot glue, then clamped them off that hot glue straight onto the planks that make up this seat. So now I'm going to finish this seat by adding a couple extra pieces of support and putting that middle plank in there and weighing it down. And then we'll move back here to this stern seat and looking at the transom here. So I take just a little batten, clamp it in a couple spots, and I had to kind of use my hands to press it in the curve that I wanted before I cut it with the jigsaw. Cutting it to a jigsaw a little bit outside the line made me come back with a plane and bring that curve down to where I thought it looked good. Then I come back in to mark the cutout for my tiller. My tiller is going to go through this hole. So with that those marked and cut, I need to make a piece of trim that's going to go just like on the aft side of that transom at the top. It's going to reinforce it, add a bunch of strength, and it's also going to just make it pretty. Jigsaw is kind of a rough tool to cut that. Take a flush trim router bit and make it match perfectly. Then cut the bottom of that curve so that it's just, I think I ended up making the top of the cutout for the tiller match that curve. And then I came back with a round over bit on a router and made everything look pretty. Good old PL Premium to glue it on. This notched trowel that I made just by cutting up a little plastic spreader from Harbor Freight. So although I'm really happy with how that these pieces mated and how that's looking, it didn't add the strength that I wanted. So I came back in and had a spare piece of ash to make an elbow to put in there to add a lot of structural support. PL Premium to glue it in, and it's hard to see behind that brick that's weighing it down, but I put in a clamp, so I was clamped into the transom and weighed it down with that brick, and that thing made it really strong. That really secured the top of there. So now what I'm going to be able to do, let me scoot over a little bit. So what I'm going to be able to do is I've got an option of where I can put my sheet from my main sheet. If I want to put it up here on top of my transom, I can. I'm thinking about putting it down back in this elbow though, because if I do, then the sheet will run to here and then it'll run forward below the tiller, and I can do a pivoting up tiller that'll stay clear of that. Anyways, now back at the transom, this little piece of hardwood trim is for me to mount the gudgeons for my rudder, and I'm going to epoxy this down. I've mentioned in a handful of videos how I don't like epoxy because in the heat it loses strength and it's really hot where I live, but this isn't really going to require any clamping force. It's not going to really need a ton of tensile strength. Yeah, they can't exactly get clamping force at the bottom there too easily. So I actually, if you look close, I put tape on the ground so that these bricks wouldn't slide, and I used these masonry bricks and just slid them in there to apply a little bit of pressure to hold that on there while that epoxy cured, that thickened epoxy cured, and it turned out good. And now I'm gonna go up front. Okay. All right, we're gonna go up front now, where I'm gonna fit this little like mini deck piece. And the old like cardstock and tape trick works pretty good for this.
Correct was sometimes I see a lot of people post things that happen in Canada where they go a prominent politician and you're like, no, this is like some whack job. Yeah, she is some whack. College isn't free, so say, hey, your college education was.
This thing actually fit pretty good without too much finagling. I think I did a little bit that I didn't film, but it wasn't too much. And then that front piece of my tabernacle, I made a little space for. I'm cutting a little bevel on the top of this because I want a spot for my adhesive. I'm going to use thickened epoxy. I want a spot for my adhesive to go in that bevel and just make more contact between my deck and my planking. That little block that I'm using is going to be the size of my Spacered Inwales. I ended up with about ½ an inch of room in there, but it's kind of close. So I did all this epoxy work in one go, and with it being 75 degrees, I got kind of a limited amount of time that I can get this done before that epoxy kicks. Came back and, I'm getting better at glass. I wish I had been this good when I put glass on the bottom instead of floating it all over the bottom, but rolling it on. And then I came up in this foredeck area and I just sealed it all up with epoxy, and I did some rough fillets on all the mating pieces just to keep water out and to add some strength. But I still got to use that PO Premium to glue something down, huh? Just don't trust epoxy that much. Oh, and I had glued in that front piece of my tabernacle before I did all this. And at the last minute, I realized that my epoxy was still wet, and I didn't want to get all my clamps stuck to my piece, so I just ripped my gloves off and clamped that deck down. But now I got to get new gloves on, and my hands are all sweaty. Filleted it all out, and then came back in with a little rubbing alcohol and softened up all the fillets. Now to the gunnels. Where should I sit for the gunnels to show off the gunnels? Okay. I think I'm going to spend a fair amount of time sitting here as I operate this boat. Next, I'm going to work on these Spacered Inwales, which are one of the prettiest things in a wooden boat. Milled down some ash. I tried something new to scarf these Inwales. I spaced them out evenly. I think I did 8 to 1 on this. And then I hot glued them and clamped that hot glue down, trying to keep everything as flush as I could. And then I came back in and put those against the fence on my table saw and cut that scarf. And you know, there are a lot harder ways to cut a scarf that would do it a little bit better, but this did a pretty good job. And of course, when I'm going to glue these scarves, you carefully line everything up. And if you notice, I clamped these to that backing piece that's got plastic on it. I tape it to that first so everything stays lined up and they don't slip out when I clamp the actual scarf joint together. And like I said, I think this turned out pretty good. Yeah, that'll work right there. Then these pieces are going to be the spacers for that Spacered Inwale, and I'm putting them on that line to make them all about the same. Okay, so I kind of screwed this up. I just fixed this in the plans. When I initially made the dimensions for these frames, I did not consider that I'm going to have to cut out space for a Spacered Inwale. I marked out how thick that was and then trimmed it at each station. So I've got the room cut out for my Inwales to fit on the spacers, but I didn't want to have a ton of stress focused right on that inner corner. That's just a bad thing to make things break. So I cut an angle out on those frames that helped spread out that stress a little bit more. Part of these Inwales was making a breast hook for the front, and everything gets cut at like an angle, and I did a bunch of work to fit that I didn't show here. Where the back of the Inwales meet with a transom, just use a block to space it off so I can cut that to be flush as it meets the stern. And this one I actually went back and fit once or twice on the port side. The starboard gunwale that I did second, I think I got it pretty good first try. And so now I'm setting up where these spacers are going to go for my Inwales. I used to do this like mathematically and space them all out exactly the same or as close to throughout the length of the boat. And then I read somewhere that you just try to kind of spread them out in a way that looks good. And ever since, that's what I've been doing. I just make the port and the starboard match. And if you pay really close attention and you walked around with a tape, you might notice that like some of these spaces are not the same, but no one's going to glance at your boat and notice that. So I like this more organic spacing better. Then you use all your clamps. I struggle sometimes to get them glued up flush to the top of where I've cut that shear line. When in doubt, leave it just a touch proud, because you can come back in and take a little bit of material off later. Scrape that squeeze out off to get a better view. And it is starting to look pretty good. Okay, so now these Inwales that I scarfed together, come back in with a round over bit. Some last minute work on breast hook. And this is going to need to get cleaning up now that it's in.
Brazil in modern youth culture. Weird, like a lot of like travel gear outfits, you know. Oh my God, this is a minor peeve. All right. People with really cute dogs. They're like, oh.
When you cut that Inwale, you got to really carefully get it cut to length. I'll show it on the starboard side. Before I glue this, I go and I clamp it on all clamp it down to just about all those spacers, because you want to get that length really exact, and then you cut it to the breast hook. And that breast hook is still moving at this point. That glue is still wet. And I had to come back in here and put shims under that breast hook and re-clamp it to get it right. Okay, so, man, I love this clip. So if you look in this clip, that clack, that's that Inwale that's already been cut to length as it comes in and just barely clears that breast hook and clacks into place. And I fit this carefully, but still this had a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch of a gap at the front, even with how tight that fit. And so you'll see me come back later and I'm going to cut off a wedge I put in. You got to see I got a shim underneath to lift that. Whatever you can do to get this to fit the way you want it to fit. And so, see, there's that little shim I put in at the front, because even when that clacked into place, I still had enough room for an 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch or so. Ooh, next spot. Where are we going next? Now I need to do this Dagger board slot. Cut a hole out big enough for my flush trim router bit and then come in and make that entry hole. And come in with a round over, and it seems simple, right? But now you got to do the bottom. Not so simple on bottom. So I was about to drill this hole, and then I realized this might not be the right hole. Then I came in from the top to see if this was a hole, and I couldn't see through all the shavings. Now I can see my hole. Just big enough for that round over bit, because I'm not sure if I don't want to drill into the side of my case. And it's flush. Round it over and spray some shavings out the top. Make sure to wear PPEs. You're getting a bunch of glass spraying all over the place. What I'm doing now is really prep work for paint. Come to the back and sand these planks down flush, round them over a little bit. Make sure not to get them too hot, because things are glued with epoxy in areas like this. Ah, the bow. Where can I sit for the bow? Oi. All right, I'm out of spots in the boat where I can show off the bow from, so we'll do it from here. So as all these planks come up and meet at the bow, a lot of guys would do an exterior stem on this, but that's too much work for me and I'm lazy. So but I needed to seal all this up, and I needed to add some strength and keep all this together and seal it up. So I cut a piece of glass to fit it, and I came back in with some thickened epoxy to try to like fill and round off this bow. And then while this epoxy is still kicking, come back and put that glass over it and try to smooth everything out and make it look decent. I'm really happy with how this glass just stuck right to it. And it was a warm day. This is probably 85 degrees in here. So this epoxy was kicking quick. If I was going to do anything like, what do you call that, like a hot coat as I put that glass on top of that epoxy, that thickened epoxy, then I was going to have to move quick. I know I'm making excuses because this looks bad. It's not going to impact the strength of the boat, and it does give it kind of like a rough work boat finish at the front end, that kind of like rugged planked boat look. So I think I'm going to leave it. I needed to do some glass tape on bottom too, where I cut out that Dagger board trunk opening on the bottom. I'd come in here too with some thickened epoxy, and because there was a spot or two with just like an imperfect glue up and a little bit of a gap, and so I filled all that in first before I did this. And really what I'm doing now, this is paint prep. Filling in all these screw holes. And that's part 7 of my build of my cruising dinghy for 2 that I designed and am building myself, the bed bug. Part 8, I'm going to get into this finish work. I'm not going to flip it. I'm going to lift it. Then I'm going to paint it, do finish work on the inside. I'm going to start making spars here soon. Then I'm going to make sails. Then it's going to go on a trailer. Yeah, it's getting close.